Hello and welcome to part 3 of the low poly character series. So far we've created the base model of the character and UV unwrapped it. Now we can start texture painting. Keep in mind all of these videos are edited and sped up to highlight the important parts. And I encourage you to take your time when you're working on your own projects. To get started, we can open up the shader editor and connect our image texture to an emission shader instead of a principled BSDF. Then let's click this dropdown and change this window from the UV editor to the image editor, and change this from view to paint. And with the brush tool selected, we can use the left and right bracket keys to change its size. And if we press N and click tool, we can go under the brush settings to change the color. We can even click this color picker icon and sample colors from our reference image. Then we can directly paint in the image editor. But instead of manually filling in the faces with the brush tool, we can use the fill tool. Let's select the body and go into edit mode, and select the arms and legs by hovering over them and pressing L. Then we can hold tab and go into texture paint mode. At the very top, right next to where it says texture paint, click this icon to enable face selection masking. Then we can press T to show the toolbar, and select the fill tool. Then we can click any area we have selected to fill it in. Now let's fill in these other parts. A faster way to pick colors is to hold Shift X and hover over the color you want to use. And remember to save the image texture frequently while you're working. We can do that by hovering over it and pressing Alt S. Next, we can fill in the hair spikes. Then let's select the head and use the brush to paint in the hair. You can either paint in the image editor, or you can paint directly on the model in the viewport. Next, we can select the boots, then fill them in, and do the same for the gloves. Now let's focus on painting the face. Let's select the head and go into the front view. Then we can enable X-ray mode by pressing Alt-Z. Then we can start painting in the features to match the reference. If you're using Blender 5.0, you can use this pixel brush if you want to. Also, if we go under Color Palette and click New, we can save color swatches. All we have to do is hover over a color, hold Shift X, and left click. Let's block in the main shapes and colors for the features first, then we can come back later and polish it. You can leave the eye like this for now, and draw in the mouth and the nose. It's a good idea to build up the detail evenly across the model. So let's start working on the hair. We can pick a lighter color than the hair's base color, then draw streaks down the middle to make highlights. We can also use the blur and the smudge tool to blend it in. And we can use a darker color like this red, and paint in the base of the spikes. Don't forget to save your image texture by pressing Alt-S. For the body, let's add shadows for the arms and legs. In the Active Tool panel, under Options, we can uncheck Occlude and Backface Culling to paint through our model to the other side. Then if we're in the front view, we can just paint a line along the edge of the arm here, and it should go all the way around. Then we can use the Blur tool to blend them in. And let's do the same thing for the legs. Make sure to check these boxes after you're done to paint normally. Then we can paint the kneecaps, and a shadow on the back of the leg. Sometimes you might run into issues with the model that you need to fix, like this. Luckily this is easy to fix, and it shouldn't mess with the UVs. Now we can add a shadow here, and on the bottom of the head. Now that we're starting to blend things more, we can smooth out some of the shading on the features. And let's scribble in something on the ear, and make it slightly more red. Another trick to add some shading is to layer some ambient occlusion on top. Let's open up the shader editor, then press Shift A and look for an ambient occlusion node, and connect it to a color ramp. Then add a mix color, and mix it with our image texture. Let's set it to multiply, and set the factor to 1, and adjust this color ramp so it's not so strong. Let's go back to the hair and add a stronger highlight. We can do that by selecting a brighter yellow and changing the blend type to Add. Then we can paint more streaks and use the smudge tool to blend them in. And we can add a darker color on the tip. To save time, we can select the UVs on the back and move them on top of the hair texture we painted. Then let's select the head and paint some shading on the hair. Then let's cheat things again and layer the UVs of these hair spikes on top of the texture we made. But I have to warn you that this is not good if you want to bake things like ambient occlusion on top. If we wanted to do that, we should make another UV layout with all of the hair islands laid out. Then we could bake this current texture to that new UV layout, and then use that to bake things like ambient occlusion. But we don't really have to worry about that if we're keeping everything inside of Blender. Using multiple UV layouts and baking textures really deserves its own video, so let me know in the comments if you would want that in the future. We can use this blur tool to soften these hard edges. And we can add a shadow here on the forehead. Another trick to make our texture look pixelated is to use a Voronoi texture. Let's open up the shader editor, and if we have the built-in Node Wrangler add-on enabled, we can select our image texture and press Ctrl T. That should give us a texture coordinate and a mapping node. Then let's add a Voronoi texture in between. And make sure the position is connected to the vector. Then we can adjust the scale to control how pixelated it is. For the pant cuffs, we can uncheck these two things in the options so we can paint all the way through. Then check them again once we're done so we don't accidentally paint through the model. It's mostly useful for things that wrap around our model, like the cuffs around the legs and the belt around the body. Here we can add in the belt loops and the pockets. We can also darken the inside of the leg to give it some shading. And we can keep it simple and add a square here for the belt buckle. To make these belt loops look less flat, we can outline them with this darker blue. After we're done with the pants, we can start on the boots. Let's disable the mirror modifier to make it easier to rotate around a single boot. Let's darken these edges where different parts meet. For stuff like this, it's usually easier to paint in the image editor than in the viewport. And let's darken the opening at the top. Then let's select the faces for the bottom part and fill them in. And if we select these faces, we can mask them, go into the side view, then go into X-ray mode by pressing Alt-Z. And because these details will appear on both sides, we can uncheck Occlude and Backface Culling. Now when we paint these lines, they'll go through to the other side. And make sure to check them again when you're finished. Here we can add the details on top, and give it more shading. Now let's mask the bottom and make it darker, and make the edges darker. Then we can add a bit of shading on the gloves, and darken the opening here. And we can add some stripes on the socks. Let's also add some simple shading to the shirt, and don't forget to save the image texture when you're done. Here's the separate image texture that was made for the sword and harness. And after we're finished texture painting, we can add some color adjustments in the shader editor. For example, we can connect our image texture to a color ramp, then layer that over with a mix shader to unify the colors or make them warmer or cooler. Then we can adjust the factor on the mix shader to control how strong it is. And now we have a textured character. Check out the next video in this series where we start to rig the character for animation. So if you found this video useful, please leave a like, and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. And if you have any questions or suggestions for future videos, let me know in the comments.